Welcome to Swy Files. I'm Swy. Have you ever heard of a ghost town? A place forgotten by time, where all traces of life have vanished, leaving only ruins and secrets buried beneath the dusty veil of the past. Right before us, on a plateau of barren land, stood the remnants of the town. A few wooden houses remained, crooked and weathered under the sun. The wood had rotted and many roofs had collapsed. Yet enough remained to recognize the outline of a town that once existed. In the distance, atop a mountain, a rusted mining machine jutted out among the rocks. Taylor approached the nearest house and gently pushed the door. The old door fell off its hinges and crashed onto the ground, creating a loud echo in the stillness of the ghost town. We stepped into the first house. Inside, trees had taken over. Pine needles scattered across the floor, and the remnants of rotted beds, tables, and chairs lay strewn about. There was nothing but the deathly silence of time gone by, yet it was enough to send chills down our spines. Taylor's eyes followed a set of carvings on the wooden wall of the house. The marks were deep and long, as if scratched by a powerful creature with claws. Her hand trembled as she touched them, filled with wonder about what had happened here. And this is the story Jack wants to tell us today. Hello, Jack.
Hello, Sway. I'm Jack, and I never thought I would embark on an adventure that nearly cost me my life. But it all started with an old story my grandfather told about a forgotten ghost town deep in the Montana mountains, not far from Yellowstone National Park. It was once a hub of mining activity in the late 19th century, but it was abandoned after a series of catastrophic events. My grandfather didn't give details, only mentioning a mysterious creature living in the woods. This creature wasn't a bear or a wolf, but something entirely different. Something that caused the collapse of the town and drove the surviving residents to flee, never to return. Growing up with stories like this, I was always curious to uncover the truth behind it. Last year, my friend Taylor and I spent a week camping in Yellowstone National Park. It was an amazing trip, and we decided we'd return the next summer, but this time to explore the ghost town my grandfather had spoken of. It would be a longer trip, deeper into lands where few people had ventured. The long, cold winter passed, and when spring arrived, Taylor and I were ready. We packed everything we needed for a week in the wilderness, including maps, a compass, and even a GPS. We drove up rocky dirt roads, winding higher into the mountains where the winter snow had melted, leaving only green trees and clear blue skies. We stopped at a point where the road could no longer be traveled. The cool mountain wind eased the harsh summer sun as we shouldered our backpacks and began our hike. My grandfather's directions to the ghost town were vague, only knowing it lay somewhere in this mountain range. But with the map and guidance from park rangers, we believed we were on the right track. The pine trees became sparser as we climbed higher. A steep cliff suddenly blocked our way, forcing us to take a detour, costing us several hours. By the time the sun began to set, we decided to camp for the night in an open area with a view of the distant town, hidden behind a thick line of trees. That night, just as I drifted off to sleep, Taylor woke me up. She whispered that she had heard the sharp snap of a branch, a sound strong and crisp, as if something large had stepped on it. We silently watched in the darkness, and then, in the pale moonlight, a flickering golden light appeared from afar. It looked like the glow of a candle, but here, in this wilderness, there was no one but us. I couldn't come up with a logical explanation, other than it might have been a mirage caused by the climate, or perhaps a nearby hunting party camping in the area. Still, neither of us could deny that the light was on the very path we planned to take the next day. The next morning, we quickly packed up our camp and continued the journey, but I couldn't stop thinking about the strange light we had seen the night before. What was waiting for us ahead? We entered a dense forest where the sunlight barely penetrated through the towering trees. Branches scratched at our legs, and I felt a growing sense of disorientation as the ground beneath seemed to shift. Taylor had to pull out the map and GPS, but strangely, the GPS wasn't receiving any signal. We had to continue relying on the paper map. Then I tripped over something. Looking down, I was startled to find a broken wooden post sticking out of the ground. Moving forward, we came across a clearing filled with old, decaying wooden crosses, many of which had rotted away. It was an abandoned cemetery. These graves bore dates from the late 19th century, and many had the same date of death, December 7th, 1891. My hands trembled as I recalled my grandfather's story about the horrific massacre that had taken place here. We stood in front of the crosses, speechless, as the atmosphere around the cemetery suddenly grew heavy. Taylor, staring at the numbers carved into the rotting wood, whispered, "It must have been disease or some kind of disaster." I wasn't sure if her words eased the anxiety creeping into our minds, but they didn't change the reality. There was something strange and frightening about this place. We stood there, among the remnants of a bygone era, among the unmarked graves, only indicated by simple wooden crosses. But if this cemetery was real, then the ghost town must be nearby. Taylor regained her composure, and we decided to move on, hoping to find the remnants of the town my grandfather had spoken of. As we crossed the cemetery, the pine trees thinned and the ground began to slope upward. When we climbed over a small hill, the sight before us left us both speechless. Right in front of us, on a barren plateau, were the remains of the town. A few wooden houses stood, crooked and weathered under the sun. The wood had rotted, many roofs had collapsed, but enough remained to recognize the outline of a town that once existed. In the distance, atop a mountain, a rusted mining machine jutted out among the rocks. Taylor approached the nearest house and gently pushed the door. The old door fell off its hinges and crashed onto the ground, causing a loud echo in the eerie silence of the ghost town. We stepped into the first house. Inside, trees had taken over. Pine needles scattered across the floor, and the remnants of decaying beds, tables, and chairs lay strewn about. There was nothing but the deathly silence of time long gone, yet it was enough to send chills down our spines. While Taylor explored inside, I stood outside, my eyes following a set of carvings on the wooden wall of the house. The marks were deep and long, as if clawed by a powerful creature. My hands trembled as I touched them, filled with questions about what had happened here. After exploring a few other houses, most of which were just rotting frames, we decided to camp in the house closest to the cemetery. It was a bit eerie, but at least it seemed sturdier than the others. Later, we hiked up the mountain, where the rusted mining machine stood silently. It was a large machine, rotted by time, but still recognizable in function, an A-frame structure with a bucket used to pull rocks from the depths below. In the distance, a steep rock incline cut into the mountain, leading to a deep, dark mine shaft that radiated mystery. We tried to guess how deep it went, but the light from our flashlights couldn't penetrate the thick darkness below. Sitting on a small rock, my legs dangled over the edge, and I looked out into the distance, where the green mountain ranges faded into the horizon. The fresh evening air briefly cleared my mind, but I couldn't shake the strange feeling that had clung to us since we entered the cemetery. As the sun set, we returned to the town to prepare for our first night. This time, we decided not to sleep outdoors, but to huddle inside the old house near the cemetery. While it didn't compare to our modern tent, the house provided a fragile sense of security, even if only temporary. That night, the soft wind blew through the empty windows, carrying the sounds of the ancient forest. I remember tossing and turning in my sleeping bag, my eyes staring into the darkness ahead. Then, my unease turned into real terror when I woke up in the middle of the night and realized something was wrong. Taylor was whispering something in the dark, her voice frantic. "Something has been here." I jolted awake. My hands fumbled for the bear spray, and as the dim light from my flashlight illuminated the room, I saw my backpack torn open, its contents scattered everywhere. My red windbreaker lay on the ground, even though I was sure I had stuffed it deep inside the pack. I looked at Taylor, and we both understood that this wasn't the work of squirrels or any small animal. Something had visited our camp, and it wasn't a creature that walked on 4 legs. Large footprints were deeply embedded in the ground, clearly left by something walking on 2 legs, and the size of them far surpassed anything we had ever seen before. When I realized the large footprints embedded deep in the ground, an indescribable fear rushed over me, freezing my body. Taylor and I looked at each other, neither of us daring to say a word, but I knew we both felt something lurking in the surrounding darkness. The wind gently rustled through the pines, carrying a faint sound, but tonight the forest no longer felt like a peaceful place. Something was stalking us. I stepped forward, crouching near the footprint, tracing the deep indentations with my fingers. The footprint was enormous, far beyond the size of any animal I had ever seen. What was more terrifying was that it clearly belonged to a creature that walked on 2 legs. My hands trembled as I touched the edge of the print, my mind racing with confusion. What was this creature? Where did it come from? And most importantly, what did it want with us? Taylor gripped my arm tightly, pulling me back to reality. "Jack, what do we do now?" Her voice quivered, and I knew she was just as scared as I was. We tried to stay calm and quickly packed up camp. I couldn't take my eyes off the surrounding darkness, my ears straining to catch every sound. Though the atmosphere was quiet, I had a distinct feeling that we were being watched. There was no doubt now, something had been observing us since we arrived at this ghost town. We decided to return to the house near the cemetery to take shelter for the night. Even though the old house offered little protection, it at least provided a flimsy barrier between us and the outside darkness. Both of us curled up in our sleeping bags. The windows were nothing but empty wooden frames, allowing the cold mountain air to flow in, carrying the sounds of breaking branches. Then, the worst happened. In the middle of the night, a loud crack echoed from deep within the forest. The sound of a large tree being snapped in half jolted me awake. Taylor shot up, her eyes wide, her hand gripping my arm as if seeking safety. "Jack, something's out there," she whispered, her voice shaking with terror. For a moment I was frozen, then I gripped the bear spray tightly, feeling the urgency of the situation. I stood cautiously, making my way to the window frame and peered outside. In the faint moonlight, I could see the silhouettes of swaying pines, but that wasn't what scared me. At the far edge of the forest, a flickering golden light appeared, the same light we had seen the night before. I pulled back, my breath quickening. This wasn't a coincidence. That light was coming from the exact path we planned to take the next day. But the problem wasn't just the light. It was the overwhelming sense that something was waiting for us there. "What do we do now?" Taylor asked, clearly struggling to stay calm. "We can't go outside right now," I whispered. "If something's out there, we need to stay in this house until morning. At least we have walls to shield us." But deep down, I knew these rotting wooden walls wouldn't protect us if that thing really wanted to come in. I sat by the window, my eyes adjusting to the thick darkness outside, ears straining for any sound. But the silence was unsettling. The wind had stopped, and the trees were no longer rustling. There was only a cold, eerie stillness. That's when I heard it, a sound I couldn't mistake. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving toward us. Those footsteps didn't belong to a 4-legged animal. They were steady, thudding, coming from something walking upright. I held my breath, not daring to move. There was only one thought in my mind. It's coming closer. Taylor sat beside me, her eyes filled with terror. Jack." "It's coming," she whispered, her voice so quiet that I could barely hear her trembling breath. I didn't dare to respond, only staring out into the night. And then, in one terrifying moment, I saw it, a massive shadow, at least twice my height, standing silently at the edge of the forest. The moonlight, peeking through the clouds, was just enough for me to make out its shape. A creature standing on two legs, enormous and covered in fur, with eyes glowing red like fire in the darkness. My body froze, my heart racing in my chest. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't any animal I had ever known. This was Bigfoot. The creature didn't move, just stood there, staring toward the house. I didn't know if it could see us, but one thing was certain. It knew we were here. Taylor trembled violently, her fear radiating through every fiber of her being. As for me, my mind raced with a flood of questions and an overwhelming sense of dread. I gripped the bear spray tightly, but deep down I knew that if this creature decided to attack, our feeble weapon wouldn't do much. I turned to Taylor, our eyes meeting, and without saying a word, we both understood that we were facing something far beyond human understanding. Suddenly, the creature moved. With a speed that defied its massive size, it glided through the trees and disappeared into the darkness. The sound of its footsteps gradually faded away until there was nothing but deathly silence. We sat in silence for a long time, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The creature was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained, as if it was still lurking somewhere in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return. That night, neither of us slept. I tried to comfort Taylor, but I couldn't shake the fear gripping me. What we had just experienced was beyond explanation. A legendary creature that existed only in horror stories was now a reality before our eyes. We had stepped into its territory, and now I wasn't sure if we would leave here safely. We sat there, in the old wooden house, surrounded by the stillness of the night, but our minds were haunted by the giant figure we had just seen. Neither Taylor nor I dared to move, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Hours had passed since the creature disappeared into the darkness, but the feeling of being watched still clung to us. That night, we tried to make as little noise as possible, even holding our breath to the point of discomfort. Every small sound, whether it was the wind through the trees or a small animal scurrying across the forest floor, made our hearts leap with fear. But the most terrifying part was the absolute silence. A deadly stillness, as if the entire forest was holding its breath along with us. The storm began slowly. At first, there were distant rumblings of thunder, but soon the rain poured down in torrents, the wind howling through the trees, echoing through the forest. Taylor seemed slightly relieved. "The rain will make it harder for it to come back," she whispered, as if trying to convince both of us that it was true. But deep down, I knew that a storm couldn't stop the massive creature we had just encountered. I sat by the window, staring out into the thick night. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the dense forest in blinding bursts. And then, in the bright flash of a lightning bolt, I saw it. The creature had returned. It stood at the edge of the forest, not far from our house, just a few steps away. This time, it wasn't just a shadowy figure. The lightning illuminated its body clearly, its glowing red eyes staring directly at us. My heart nearly stopped when I realized it knew exactly where we were. Taylor started shaking, and I tried to keep calm, but the fear was surging through my veins. There was no escaping. This creature was too big, too powerful. It could tear through the decaying wooden house with a single strike, and nothing could stop it. "We have to do something," Taylor whispered, her voice trembling. I knew she was right, but we had nothing but bear spray, a small defense that couldn't stop a creature like this. "We can't go outside. We'd be trapped if it gets any closer." Outside, the rain continued to pour down, but it didn't deter the creature. It took slow, deliberate steps toward the house. I held my breath, gripping the bear spray tightly. Even though I knew it wouldn't protect us, I still clung to the hope that somehow a miracle would happen. Then, suddenly a sound rang out. Not from the creature, but from the other side of the forest. A deep, heavy growl. The sound wasn't from the wind or the storm, but from something else, another creature. Taylor and I looked at each other, our eyes wide. Could it be that this creature wasn't the only one? The creature standing outside the house stopped when it heard the growl. It turned its head toward the source of the sound, as if listening intently. The air grew thick with anticipation, and I could sense an imminent confrontation. And then, in a moment of sheer terror, we saw another creature emerge. Just as massive and terrifying as the first, but it seemed even stronger and fiercer. It charged out of the forest, heading straight for the first creature. The growl echoed again, and the two creatures collided, engaging in a brutal battle right before our eyes. The scene unfolded so quickly that we could only stand there, frozen, unable to move. Heavy blows landed, and the furious roars shook the ground beneath us. The second creature, with its superior strength, managed to push the first creature back into the forest. After a powerful strike, the first creature turned and fled, its heavy footsteps fading into the rain and thunder. But the second creature didn't give chase. It stood still, staring at us. Taylor and I held our breath, not daring to move. The second creature stared at us for a long moment, then slowly turned away and disappeared into the night, leaving us in a state of absolute horror. The small house was enveloped in an eerie silence once the battle ended. I looked at Taylor, and neither of us could speak. What had just happened was beyond belief. We had witnessed a battle between two legendary creatures, beings that only existed in myth. After what felt like an eternity, I finally let out a sigh of relief. But that relief was short-lived, because I knew that the creature could return at any moment. And what terrified me more was that we didn't know if the second creature was a protector or another threat. After the horrifying battle between the two colossal creatures, we were far from calm. Taylor sat on the floor, hugging her knees, her face pale as if drained of all blood. I wasn't much different. Frozen, cold sweat running down my body despite the freezing weather outside. We both knew we had just witnessed something unbelievable. Something no one could ever expect. The existence of not just one, but two legendary creatures. And more terrifying, they had fought right in front of us, as if competing for territory. The house was silent, except for the sound of rain outside. Something inside me told me that the creature could return at any moment, and we couldn't stay here any longer. We had to leave, immediately. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice hoarse from fear. Taylor looked up at me, her eyes filled with confusion and panic. "But where will we go? It's the middle of the night, and those things are out there." She didn't dare say the names, but I understood. Out there were creatures we couldn't control, couldn't face. "We don't have any other choice," I replied, trying to stay calm, even though my heart was pounding. "If they come back and find us, we won't have a chance. At the very least, we need to find a way to get out of this forest." We both agreed, though fear gripped our hearts. There wasn't time to think. We quickly gathered our belongings, but I made sure to only take what was necessary. The bear spray was still the only weapon I had, though I knew it would be useless against creatures of that size. Outside, the storm raged on, thunder rumbling through the forest like a wild beast. But it couldn't drown out the growing anxiety inside me. Each moment felt stretched out, every second a step closer to death. We stepped out of the house, cautiously surveying the surroundings. The dense forest, with the weak beams of our flashlights, seemed impenetrable under the thick night sky. Bare branches trembled in the storm, as if concealing something beneath. I led the way, with Taylor close behind. We tried to walk as quietly as possible, even though our feet were soaked and frozen to the bone. We headed toward the path we had taken earlier in the day, but the darkness had transformed it into a maze filled with unseen threats. Taylor held onto my arm tightly, and we both tried not to make a sound, though I could feel her heavy, anxious breathing. We needed to move quickly, but not too fast to make noise. Every time I stepped over a broken branch, I felt as if I was awakening something in the darkness. And then, suddenly, the sound returned. A deep, heavy thud like the footsteps of a massive beast moving through the forest. Taylor and I froze in place, too scared to breathe. My heart pounded wildly in my chest. The footsteps echoed again, clearer, closer. Taylor looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. "It's coming," she whispered, her voice as soft as the wind. We quickly turned off our flashlights, trying to blend into the darkness. The surrounding air was so thick that I could barely see beyond the pitch-black sky. But I knew that didn't matter. The creature didn't need light to see us. The footsteps continued, growing closer with each step. I could feel the ground tremble beneath me, as if each step of the creature was causing the entire forest to shudder. We couldn't stay here any longer. I grabbed Taylor's hand, pulling her forward, hoping the storm and the darkness would hide our movements. But the footsteps behind us didn't stop. It knew we were here. I didn't think I could run any faster, but as soon as I sensed the creature's breath close behind, my body instinctively sped up, my legs running as if my life depended on each step, which it did. Taylor was right beside me, her breath heavy, her eyes wide with terror. The creature's footsteps grew louder and closer. I could hear its labored breathing, the sound of its claws tearing into the earth as it chased us. It was no longer just watching, it was hunting. We were its prey. "Run faster," I yelled to Taylor, even though I knew she was already running with everything she had. My body was starting to give out, but I couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. We ran through the forest, no longer caring which direction we were heading. Branches scratched at my skin, but I couldn't feel the pain, only the overwhelming fear. Then, in that terrifying moment, I heard the sound that made my blood freeze. The furious roar of the creature, so close that I could feel the vibration in the air. "Jack!" Taylor screamed. She stumbled, her legs giving out. I turned, and in that instant, I saw the massive silhouette of the creature emerging from the trees, its red eyes locked on us. It was charging, faster than I could have ever imagined. I knew I couldn't save Taylor in time, but I couldn't leave her behind. I raised the bear spray, aiming directly at the creature, praying for a miracle. In that brief moment, I sprayed a burst into the air, hoping it would at least slow the creature down. The deafening roar that followed nearly made me deaf, but something strange happened. The creature recoiled slightly, as if surprised by the sharp, burning scent of the spray. Even though it was only a few seconds, it was enough time for me to pull Taylor to her feet, and we both resumed running. We had no idea how far we ran, only that our legs kept moving through the darkness, until the roars and the sound of pursuing footsteps finally faded into the storm. We stopped, our breaths ragged, sweat pouring down like rain. My hands shook as I looked around. The creature was nowhere to be seen. We had escaped, for now. I looked at Taylor, her eyes still wide with fear, but we both knew it was only a matter of time. The creature hadn't given up, and the hunt wasn't over. Now we had only one option: keep running, never stopping, until we either found a way out of the forest, or until the creature caught us. The rain continued to pour relentlessly, each drop beating against the trees as if mocking our desperate escape. Taylor and I raced through the dense darkness of the forest, our legs exhausted, but we knew we couldn't stop. Every time I looked back, I felt the burning red eyes of the creature still following us, its heavy footsteps echoing in my mind like a death march. We couldn't keep going like this. Both of us were drained, and the rain made everything more difficult. My shoes were soaked. Each step was painful as the sharp rocks cut through the fabric. But I knew that if we stopped, within minutes we'd be swallowed by the night and the monster that had been hunting us since the start of this terrifying journey. Jack, I can't go on, Taylor panted, her voice choking from exhaustion. She staggered and nearly collapsed, but I quickly grabbed her arm, pulling her up. We have to keep going, just a little more, I whispered, though I didn't believe my own words. There was nowhere to go. This forest was like a maze with no escape, and the creature of. We kept moving, but our pace had slowed. The air felt heavier, and I began to sense something was very wrong. There were no more footsteps, no more angry growls. Everything had fallen into a deadly silence, a silence I knew was the sign that something was about to happen. And then we heard it, the heavy, ragged breathing, like the breath of a beast about to attack. The sound came from behind us, so close I could feel it brushing against my back. I turned my head, the weak beam of my flashlight cutting through the thick darkness, and I saw it, the creature, standing tall right in front of us. Its fiery red eyes blazed in the pouring rain, glowing like flames in the night. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, and Taylor let out a scream of pure terror. The creature wasn't slow anymore. It charged toward us with terrifying speed, like a nightmare come to life. "Run!" I yelled to Taylor, but she was frozen in fear. I grabbed her hand, pulling her forward, but my legs felt like they were giving out. We stumbled as we ran, my eyes unable to look away from the massive figure closing in, its long arms reaching out as if to grab us. And then, like a miracle, we saw a light ahead. Through the misty rain, I caught a glimpse of hope, a bright golden light glowing in the darkness, coming from a small wooden cabin in the forest. I didn't need to think. I dragged Taylor toward the light, hoping it would be the only refuge we had. We burst into the cabin, slamming the door shut behind us as soon as we entered. Both of us collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, but safety hadn't come yet. Outside, the creature had arrived. It stood just beyond the door, its heavy breathing audible, full of rage. The cabin shook as it began to claw at the wooden door, each powerful strike making the house tremble. "Jack, it's going to break through," Taylor cried, her voice filled with despair. I looked around, but the cabin was empty, save for a few old pieces of furniture and rotting wood. The light from an oil lamp on a wooden table flickered, casting a small glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness. I gripped a wooden plank nearby, my hands trembling, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't do anything to stop the creature if it broke through. The scratching at the door grew louder and more violent, and then came the sound I had been dreading, the splintering of wood. The creature had begun to break through the door. In a matter of minutes, it would burst in, and we would have no place left to hide. In a moment of desperation, I recalled my grandfather's story about the ghost town. He had mentioned something about a safe place where the townspeople once fled when the creature appeared. But where was it? Could this cabin be that place? I didn't have time to think anymore. I pulled Taylor closer, our eyes meeting in a shared moment of fear and hopelessness. "If it breaks in, we'll jump out the window and run," I whispered, knowing it was a futile plan. But at least we wouldn't die sitting and waiting. And then the unimaginable happened. Just as the creature was about to smash through the door, a loud roar echoed from deep within the forest. It was unlike any sound I had heard before, deep, powerful, and full of fury. The creature outside the door stopped, seemingly distracted by the noise. Then, another sound came from the distance, and the creature outside turned and fled, its heavy footsteps fading into the stormy night. Taylor and I sat in silence, unable to believe what had just happened. We had survived, but what had driven the creature away? Was it that roar? Or was there another creature approaching? The cabin fell back into silence, save for the sound of rain tapping on the roof. I looked out the window, but saw nothing beyond the endless darkness. Yet I knew this wasn't over. The creature was still out there, somewhere in the forest, and we had only narrowly escaped this time. The chase wasn't over, and no one knew when it would return. Sitting inside the small cabin, Taylor and I dared not move, sensing the eerie silence surrounding us. The roar from deep within the forest still echoed in my mind, powerful and commanding. Perhaps it had saved us from the creature's attack, but I couldn't shake the thought. What if the one that saved us was even more dangerous? Taylor huddled closer to me, trembling. "Jack, we can't stay here forever. If it comes back, or if the other one arrives, we won't stand a chance." She was right. We couldn't stay in this decrepit cabin, where empty windows and rotting wooden walls offered little protection from the things lurking in the dark. But where could we go? The forest was a maze, with no daylight to guide us, and every sound in the night felt like a prelude to death. "We need to find a way out," I said, though even I wasn't sure of the answer. All we had was a fragile hope. I stood up and shone my flashlight around the cabin. The weak beam of light illuminated dusty walls and cobweb-covered corners. Suddenly, the light landed on something unusual near the fireplace. It wasn't just an ordinary wall. I stepped closer and discovered markings etched into the wood. The symbols were faint, hidden by layers of time and dust, but under the dim light I could make out ancient carvings. "Taylor, look at this," I whispered, a sense of awe in my voice. She came closer, crouching down beside me. They were strange symbols, some form of ancient communication. It seemed like someone had tried to leave a message, a warning, but we couldn't decipher its full meaning. "I don't know what this is," Taylor muttered, her eyes glued to the carvings. "But maybe the people who were here before knew something about those creatures." I nodded, thinking hard. Maybe this town hadn't been abandoned due to natural disasters or mining failures, as my grandfather had said. Maybe it was something lurking in the darkness, something the townspeople couldn't defeat. And now, we were caught in the same nightmare they had tried to escape. We didn't have much time. The creature could return at any moment, or worse, the new creature that saved us might appear. I no longer trusted anything in this cursed forest. "We have to leave," I whispered, feeling Taylor's breath growing heavier beside me. "This cabin isn't just an ordinary shelter. These symbols might point to a place or a way out of this forest." "What do you mean?" Taylor asked, her wide eyes filled with doubt. "I'm not sure, but maybe the people who were here before found a way to escape the creature. If we can figure out more about these symbols, we might find a way out." Taylor was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "We don't have any other choice, Jack." I focused the flashlight on the strange markings, scanning the wall carefully for any clues. Suddenly, I noticed a small crack near the floor where the wall met the ground. I crouched down and pried at it with my fingers, and immediately a wooden plank fell away. Behind it, there was a dark space, a hidden passage. "There's something here," I said, my voice shaking with excitement. Taylor knelt beside me, and we both peered into the darkness. It led downward, like a hidden tunnel. "We have to go down there," I decided, though fear gripped me about what might be waiting below. There was no time to hesitate. We crawled into the pitch-black tunnel, hoping it was our only escape. As we scrambled through the narrow space, the sound of claws scraping at the cabin door grew louder overhead. The creature had returned. We crawled faster, not daring to look back. The noise above us intensified, and I could feel the ground trembling beneath me. Then, with a loud crash, the door was shattered. "Hurry, Taylor!" I yelled in desperation. We sped forward, not stopping until the ground beneath us sloped downward, leading us into a wider space. We had escaped the hidden tunnel, but I still had no idea where we were. The faint light of our flashlight revealed a large room, a place that clearly had once been inhabited. Dust-covered tables and chairs sat in eerie stillness, and the walls were adorned with ancient paintings, depicting scenes I could barely comprehend. Creatures like monsters were chasing humans, hunting them through dense forests. The murals told a story of people who had survived the very thing we were facing. Then, I saw it. At the far end of the room stood a wooden door, seemingly leading out. "Taylor, look," I whispered, pointing toward the door. She nodded, her eyes glowing with a glimmer of hope. We moved toward it, but just as my hand touched the doorknob, a horrifying sound echoed from behind us. I turned, and there it was. The creature. It had found us. There was no time left. I yanked the door open, and we bolted through it. But what we found wasn't freedom. In front of us was a long, dark tunnel, with stone steps leading deep underground. "We have to go," I said, with no time to think. We raced down the cold stone steps, too terrified to look back. Taylor and I both knew that if we stopped, the massive creature would swallow us whole in the dark. Its footsteps echoed behind us, each one a voiceless warning, urging us to keep running. The tunnel descended deeper than I had imagined. Darkness enveloped everything, save for the dim light of my flashlight illuminating the damp stone walls. Each step we took reverberated through the claustrophobic space, as if the tunnel itself was alive and breathing. Taylor clung tightly to my hand, her breath shallow and trembling. "Jack, where are we going?" Her voice was barely a whisper, filled with fear. "We just have to keep going," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, though I had no clear answer. The only thing I knew was that we had to get as far away from the creature chasing us as possible. Suddenly, a terrifying roar erupted from above, as if the creature had realized we were hiding underground. The roar echoed through the stone, shaking the walls. Taylor screamed, and I had to pull her forward. There was no time to be afraid anymore. We couldn't stop. We couldn't look back. As the tunnel widened, I noticed something had changed. The air grew cooler, and strange noises began to fill the space, whispers echoing from deep within the earth, as if hundreds of voices were murmuring together. Taylor froze, turning to look at me in panic, but I shook my head, signaling her to keep moving. We couldn't stop in this darkness, not while that thing was still hunting us. But the whispers grew louder. They were no longer meaningless sounds. I started to make out words. Ancient words, in a language I had never heard before, but somehow felt oddly familiar. It was as if someone was trying to communicate with us from deep within the earth. "Taylor, do you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. We both heard the voices, and it made the atmosphere in the tunnel even heavier, more oppressive. We continued to walk, but our pace slowed as the whispers grew closer and clearer. Then, suddenly, we reached a fork in the tunnel. Two paths leading in different directions, each shrouded in thick darkness. "Which way do we go?" Taylor asked, her eyes filled with confusion. I stood still, staring at the two paths ahead. There were no signs, and both looked equally foreboding. Then, from one of the tunnels, I heard a faint sound, the trickling of water. "This way," I decided, pulling Taylor toward the direction of the water. If there was running water, it might lead us to an underground stream, possibly an exit. We walked on, and the tunnel began to widen. My flashlight revealed smooth stone walls, etched with markings that seemed far older than anything we had seen. These carvings were different from the symbols we had found in the cabin. They depicted giant creatures, like the ones we had encountered, but clearer, more detailed. A chill ran down my spine as I realized these beings had existed here long before us, long before humanity. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the tunnel, and I heard a loud noise from behind. I turned quickly, but saw nothing but darkness. Taylor clung to my arm, her panic mounting. "Should we turn back?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper of desperation. "No," I replied, though I was filled with doubt. "We can't go back. The only way is forward." We continued moving, and finally I saw something ahead. A massive stone door, intricately carved, emerged from the shadows in the faint glow of my flashlight. The air here was different, heavy, suffocating, as though this place had not been disturbed by human presence for centuries. On the door, there was a large symbol, similar to the ones we had seen on the walls in the cabin. I reached out to touch the door, but immediately recoiled. It was freezing cold, and I could feel a strange energy pulsing through it. "What do we do?" Taylor whispered, her voice filled with fear. "Does this door lead out?" I didn't know. I couldn't be sure of anything anymore. But in that moment, I felt one thing clearly. We had no other choice. The creature was still chasing us, and if we didn't find an exit, it would find us first. I pushed the door with all my strength, and to my surprise, it opened easily, revealing a vast open space beyond. A large stone chamber, dimly lit by the faint glow of torches hanging on the walls. But that wasn't what shocked me most. In the center of the room stood something. A figure, towering and immense. It wasn't the creature that had been hunting us, but it wasn't human either. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and I could feel an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. We were facing something far beyond our comprehension. Taylor screamed, and I knew we had reached the end. The figure had been waiting for us, as though it had anticipated our arrival for a long time. But it didn't move. It simply stood there, watching us. "Jack, what do we do?" Taylor's voice quivered with terror, but I had no answer, because I didn't know. Standing before this creature, I felt utterly powerless. We had run and escaped for so long, but now it seemed as though we had finally come face to face with something inescapable. And the creature, as if reading my thoughts, took one step forward, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. This was it. The final confrontation. The massive creature stood before us, its glowing eyes piercing into my mind as if it could read every thought, every fear, every mystery that clouded my consciousness. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. Taylor gripped my hand tightly, her trembling revealing the depth of her terror. I could feel the fear spreading through her, amplifying the panic growing within me. We had run, we had hidden, but now we stood before something far beyond our understanding. This creature wasn't just a monster, it was a symbol of something ancient, something profound that humanity had never comprehended. "Jack, what do we do now?" Taylor whispered, her voice choked by fear. I looked into her panicked eyes and knew I had to make a decision. Although I wasn't certain of anything anymore, one thing was clear: there was no turning back. "We have to keep moving forward," I whispered back, my voice hoarse from fear. I took a step toward the creature, trying to stay calm, though my heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst. Taylor followed close behind, and together, we cautiously approached the towering figure. It stood still, unmoving, as though it were waiting for us. When we were just a few steps away from the creature, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. Every instinct screamed danger. Yet strangely, the creature didn't attack. It simply stood there, its glowing eyes observing us with a strange, unsettling calm. Then something unimaginable happened. The creature moved slightly, and I realized its enormous hands were opening. Between its palms, I saw something, a glowing stone, radiating a warm, inviting light that seemed out of place in the oppressive darkness. "What is that?" Taylor asked, her voice trembling with both fear and curiosity. I took another cautious step closer, my eyes fixated on the glowing stone. I didn't know why, but something inside me told me this stone was connected to everything. It was the key to understanding what was happening. I reached out, moving slowly toward the creature, until my fingers brushed the surface of the stone. The moment I touched it, a powerful surge of energy shot through me. My mind was flooded with chaotic images, memories from centuries past. I saw ancient people living in this forest, hunted by giant creatures like the one before us. They had tried to escape, but were no match for the creature's strength. Then, they discovered this stone, a strange, powerful artifact capable of holding the creatures at bay. Taylor tugged at my arm, pulling me from the visions. "Jack, what's happening?" You looked like you were in a trance. I shook myself back to reality. Looking again at the stone in the creature's hands, I understood its significance. This stone was the key. It was what the ancient people had used to protect themselves. But why was the creature giving it to us now? What did it want from us? As I pondered, the creature slowly stepped back, its eyes still locked on me and Taylor. There was no hostility in its movements. Instead, there was something else, something more complex, as though it wasn't an enemy but a guardian. It had given us something valuable, though we didn't fully understand it yet. "We need to take the stone," I whispered to Taylor. "I think it's the only way we can escape this place." Taylor hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "If it can help us get out of this nightmare, I'm willing to take the risk." I carefully lifted the glowing stone from the creature's hands. The moment I grasped it, a strange energy flowed through me, filling me with a sense of power and purpose. The creature bowed its head slightly, as if it had completed its task, and slowly faded into the shadows. I stood there, holding the stone, unsure of what to do next. But before I could think, a terrifying sound echoed from behind us, the roar of the giant creature that had been chasing us. It was coming. It hadn't given up the hunt. "Run, Taylor!" I shouted, clutching the stone tightly. We bolted toward the stone door we had entered through, but when we reached it, it had slammed shut. There was no way out. "Damn it!" I cursed in desperation. "We're trapped." Taylor frantically searched the room, but there was nothing to help us. The creature was closing in, and this time, it wouldn't stop. I could feel the ground shaking beneath my feet, the heavy thudding of its steps growing louder, the darkness swallowing everything. In that moment, I remembered the stone in my hand. "Taylor, get back!" I yelled, raising the stone high. The light from the stone intensified, glowing brighter and brighter until it filled the entire chamber. Just as the creature was about to pounce, the light erupted in a blinding flash, illuminating the room. The creature froze, its fiery red eyes flickering for a brief moment before it let out an enraged roar and retreated a few steps. The light seemed to terrify it, but I knew it wouldn't stop for long. "What do we do now?" Taylor screamed, panic rising in her voice. I scanned the room, desperate for an escape. Then I saw it, a small door hidden behind the stone wall, barely visible in the shadows. It was our only chance. "There's a door, run!" We sprinted toward the hidden door, the glowing stone lighting our way. Behind us, the creature let out another furious roar, but it couldn't come closer. The light from the stone kept it at bay, at least for now. We burst through the door, leaving the creature behind. The tunnel stretched out before us, dark and narrow, but it was a way out. As we ran, I held the stone tightly, its light our only guide through the unknown. The creature's roars faded into the distance, but I knew this wasn't over. We had escaped, for now, but there were still so many questions. What was the stone's true power? Why had the creature given it to us? And what other dangers awaited us in this dark, forgotten world? As we ran through the tunnel, I realized that this journey was far from over. The stone had opened a door, not just to our survival, but to a deeper mystery, one we had only begun to uncover. As Taylor and I stumbled through the small door, collapsing onto the ground, our breaths came in ragged gasps, our hearts racing with panic. The light from the stone in my hand continued to illuminate the space around us, emitting an unfamiliar energy I had never felt before. We knew that although we had temporarily escaped the massive creature, the battle was far from over. Unanswered questions still lingered in my mind, but most pressing was the glowing stone in my hand, a relic given to us by a creature that had chosen not harm us. The stone carried a power I could barely begin to comprehend. "Where do we go from here?" Taylor asked, her voice shaky, betraying the fear she no longer tried to hide. Her eyes, once filled with resilience, now showed the raw terror she had been suppressing. I scanned the room. It looked like part of an ancient underground complex. The stone walls were intricately carved with strange, cryptic images. As the glow from the stone reflected off the walls, I realized these were not just random carvings. They were telling a story. I moved closer to one of the walls, holding up both the flashlight and the glowing stone for a better view. The carvings depicted an ancient civilization that had once lived in this forest, thousands of years ago. These people had encountered the same monstrous beings we had seen. They had been hunted, terrorized, and forced into hiding. But then, they found something, a glowing stone like the one I now held. It was their only weapon against the creatures. "Taylor, look at this," I whispered, my pulse quickening as the pieces of the puzzle began to come together. Taylor stepped closer, her eyes wide with shock. "This stone? They used it to fend off the creatures?" "Yes," I nodded. "This is the only protection we have. The ancient people discovered it and used it to drive back the monsters." But as I stared at the images, another question nagged at me. If this stone was so powerful, how did this ancient civilization vanish? Why hadn't they survived and thrived, even with such a powerful weapon at their disposal? But if they had the stone, why didn't they survive? Taylor voiced my thoughts aloud, her eyes filled with anxiety. "What happened to them?" I shook my head, trying to piece it all together. The room, though ancient and abandoned, held no clues to their fate. Had they failed to protect themselves from the creature? Or was there something even more dangerous that we had yet to encounter? Before I could process any further, the ground beneath us began to tremble. Small rocks and dust fell from the ceiling as the walls shook. Taylor clung to my arm. "What's happening?" "Maybe the creature hasn't given up yet," I replied, trying to keep calm. "We need to find a way out before it finds us." We searched the room frantically, and soon I spotted a narrow exit on the far side of the wall. "Over here!" I shouted, running toward it. Together, we squeezed through the passage, continuing our escape through the winding underground maze. Our footsteps echoed loudly in the tight corridors, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Something, an unseen presence, was following us, stalking our every step. We kept running, the air becoming thick and stifling the deeper we went. Then, ahead of us, I saw a faint light. Not the glow from the stone, but natural light, as if we were nearing the surface. "We're almost out," Taylor cried with joy, but I remained cautious. A part of me refused to believe this nightmare would end so easily. Still, hope was all we had left, and I clung to it. When we finally burst out of the narrow passage, the blinding sunlight hit us hard. I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the brightness. Before us was a dense forest, sunlight filtering through the canopy above. The sight of the forest felt like a temporary reprieve, but deep down, I knew we weren't safe yet. "Are we really free?" Taylor asked, her voice trembling with hope. But before I could answer, a deafening roar echoed through the trees. I turned around, eyes widening with horror. In the distance, between the towering trees, the massive creature reappeared, moving toward us once again. And this time, it wasn't alone. A second shadow, even larger and more menacing, emerged from another direction, its eyes glowing with malevolent energy. Both creatures advanced toward us, their combined fury aimed directly at us. Taylor gripped my arm tightly, her voice shaking. "Jack, what do we do?" I glanced down at the glowing stone in my hand, feeling the immense power coursing through it. But would it be enough to stop both creatures? I wasn't sure, but it was our only hope. "We're going to fight," I whispered, raising the stone high. Its light intensified, radiating stronger than ever before. I had no idea if we could survive this, but there was no turning back now. The creatures charged, their roars shaking the forest as the ground trembled beneath their colossal weight. I could feel the power from the stones surging within me, and I knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. Either we would overcome this, or it would be the end. The stone's light flared, filling the entire forest with its blinding glow. and as the creatures closed in, the battle for our survival had begun. The light from the stone in my hand blazed brightly, illuminating the entire forest, as if the very space around us was ignited by an inexplicable force. Taylor stood beside me, her eyes wide with fear and uncertainty, but in the overwhelming light, I felt a fragile glimmer of hope. The two massive creatures were charging at us from opposite directions, their eyes glowing red, not just hunting, but intent on finishing us. I gripped the stone tightly, feeling its strange energy coursing through me. This stone was more than just an artifact. It was something far greater, a weapon capable of standing against these colossal creatures. But I didn't know how to control it. All I had was the hope that the connection between me and the stone would be enough to fend off the monsters. "What do we do, Jack?" Taylor shouted, her voice trembling with fear. I didn't respond. I had no idea what to do. The creatures were closing in, roaring with fury. The entire forest seemed to tremble beneath their feet, and the leaves rustled as if the very trees were terrified of the battle that was about to begin. I raised the stone higher, and its light surged even brighter, spreading out in waves of energy that engulfed the forest. The creatures hesitated for a moment as the light hit them, but they quickly roared again, pushing their enormous bodies forward. I could feel their breath nearing, the ground shaking beneath my feet, signaling that death was imminent. Just when I thought it was all over, something extraordinary happened. The light from the stone didn't just illuminate, it exploded outward in a powerful shockwave, pushing back the two creatures. Their roars became frantic, as if they were struck by a painful force. I couldn't believe my eyes as I saw both monsters retreat, their glowing red eyes dimming for a brief moment. "Jack, what's happening?" Taylor asked, astonished. "I don't know," I replied, my breath heavy, but I could feel the stone's power growing stronger. It wasn't just protecting us, it was attacking the creatures. Maybe this is how those before us fought them off. The first creature roared angrily, attempting to lunge at us again, but the stone's light had become too powerful. I sensed a change in the air, a cold, eerie presence as if some unseen force was taking control of the situation. And then, in the midst of the glowing light, I saw a figure emerge. Not a creature, but a man. A tall, ancient-looking man, dressed in clothes from a time long gone. The light from the stone enveloped him, and I realized he wasn't an enemy. "Do not fear," the man said, his voice deep and commanding. "The stone is the key, but it only works when its wielder understands its purpose. You have run long enough. Now is the time to face what you have been running from." "Who are you?" Taylor asked, her voice shaky with confusion. "I am the last of the civilization that created this stone." The man answered, "We fought these creatures centuries ago, but we failed because we didn't understand its true power. You have been chosen to continue the fight." I didn't fully understand everything he said, but I knew this was the moment to use the stone correctly. The man raised his hand, touching the stone in mine, and instantly I felt a new surge of energy flow through me. The stone glowed brighter, more powerful than ever before. I knew now that we didn't need to run anymore. The creatures roared in rage, trying to charge at us again, but the light from the stone exploded in a blinding storm of energy. It surged across the forest, causing the ground and trees to tremble, and the creatures were thrown back. Their roars became weak, barely audible. I tightened my grip on the stone, feeling its absolute power. The man beside me smiled, as if he had known all along what would happen. "You have done it," he said. "Now, finish this battle." With one decisive move, I raised the stone even higher, and its light erupted one final time, brighter and more intense than anything before. The forest was bathed in the radiant glow, and the two creatures screamed in agony before they slowly began to fade, their massive bodies dissolving into the darkness as though they had never existed. When the light finally dimmed, the forest fell silent. Taylor and I stood there, panting, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The stone in my hand had lost its glow, now quiet and still, as if it had fulfilled its purpose. The man looked at us one last time before fading into the light himself, disappearing like a ghost. But before he vanished completely, he left us with one final message. The battle is over, but remember, true strength comes from faith and courage. You have proven yourselves worthy. And then he was gone. Taylor and I stood alone in the quiet forest. The creatures were no more. The battle had ended. We were free. The final fight was over. As the light from the stone faded, the forest around us returned to its eerie silence. The faint glow of dawn filtered through the thick canopy above, casting a soft glow on the ground. The quiet was almost surreal after everything we had been through, as if the terrifying events of the night were nothing more than a nightmare. Taylor and I stood still, absorbing the stillness, the absence of the creature's roars, and the oppressive sense of being hunted by unseen forces. It was over, but the relief we felt was tinged with disbelief. "Have we really escaped?" Taylor asked, her voice shaky as she struggled to comprehend what had just happened. I looked down at the stone in my hand. The brilliant light that had once emanated from it was gone, leaving only a dull, lifeless rock. It felt heavy in my palm, as though it had fulfilled its purpose and no longer held any power. I nodded slowly, exhaling deeply. "Yes, we've made it," I replied, still fixated on the stone. A strange sense of loss washed over me, as I were letting go of something deeply important, even though I had only possessed the stone for a short time. Taylor turned to me, her eyes filled with exhaustion, but also relief. "Jack, I still can't believe what we just went through. It all feels so unreal." I offered a tired smile. "I know, but it's over now. The stone, the creatures, they're all part of this place, and we've left them behind." For a moment we stood in silence, trying to process everything that had happened. The morning sunlight warmed our skin, bringing a sense of peace that had been absent throughout our harrowing journey. It felt like the forest itself had been restored, no longer tainted by the dark presence that had haunted us. "We should head back," Taylor finally said, breaking the quiet. "No one's going to believe what we've been through, but the important thing is, we survived." I nodded, taking one last look around. The forest, which had been a place of mystery and terror, now seemed just like any other patch of wilderness. The creatures, the stone, and the dark secrets of this place had been left behind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the end. Not completely. We began our trek back, following the path that had led us into this nightmare. The trail, once filled with tension and fear, now felt less oppressive. There were no more sinister eyes watching us, no more threatening roars from the shadows. We walked in silence, neither of us wanting to talk about what had just happened, at least not yet. The sun had risen higher by the time we reached the edge of the forest. I could see the trailhead where we had started, full of excitement and curiosity just days ago. But now, everything had changed. We weren't the same people who had ventured into these woods. We had faced something beyond our understanding and emerged alive. Changed, but alive. "What are we going to tell people?" Taylor asked, her voice thoughtful. "No one will ever believe what we've been through." I chuckled softly. "Maybe we don't need to tell the whole story. Some things are better left behind." Together, we stepped out onto the familiar trail, leaving the forest and its mysteries behind us. But I knew that, even though we had returned to the world as we knew it, we were no longer the same. The creatures, the stone, and the enigmatic figure we encountered, these would forever be a part of us. I looked down at the stone in my hand one last time before setting it down by the side of the trail. Its purpose had been fulfilled, and it no longer belonged to me. It belonged here, in this forest, a relic of the past we had just experienced. Taylor and I continued down the path, leaving the stone behind as it lay quietly at the edge of the woods. its secrets waiting for the next traveler who might venture too deep. We returned to the real world, a place without giant creatures or supernatural battles. But in our minds, everything had changed. The forest and its secrets would remain with us, forever a part of our journey. The adventure had ended, but I knew there would always be mysteries that would never be solved. The stone, resting quietly in the woods, would lie in wait, keeping its power and its history for the next one brave or foolish enough to seek it out. And even though we had returned, we were no longer the same people who had entered the forest.
Thank you, Jack, for sharing this thrilling story with us.